I know there's some people on the stream right now. I'm doing a test with the sound. How is it coming through? And you can do your emojis and all those kinds of fun things right now. We're going to start soon, but not quite yet. I'm just doing a little bit of a sound check with our streamers. So please, don't be shy. I'm watching it right now. I know there's plenty of you watching. Come on. Tell me how it is. If you're that shy and you happen to have my phone number, just text me about your feelings if that's the space that you need. I understand. Yeah.
Bars down.
I'm doing another check with the sound with our streamer. Someone said there was a little bit of an echo. It might be just because of the sound there, but I'd like to, I did a little difference of this. Is this better?
If anyone needs to use the bathroom.
Okay, so you're saying that it could be louder. Okay. Okay, I'm testing it again. To my streamers, please help me out here. Is this better for you? How we doing? Your typing counts. Okay, so the sound is low. Ooh, how bizarre. Testing, testing. How we doing? Tell me, tell me. Okay, so I'm seeing that someone's not getting an echo now, but this is kind of the new thing. I'm double checking. Oh yeah, so you think you're good now? We're good? This is exciting. That means we're gonna start. How we feeling? Anyone confirm that as well? Hold on, hold on. Oh yeah. Now we finally got sound good everywhere. This is exciting. Now, this is the Eastman's home. Do you want me to say a couple things now, or do you want to jump here now?
What, like where the bathroom is? What?
Well, for those who are streaming, wherever you are, there's probably a restroom or a bathroom nearby. For those who are here, it would be down through the back and that hallway to the right.
Just around the corner.
Just around the corner. Wash your hands with soap. If not, we have hand sanitizer here, and if you are home, you're on your own.
And for treats too.
Oh yeah, you're on your own for treats too at the very end. But don't worry, you can have some. We give you full permission to have ice cream, chocolate, whatever you have. Okay? Yeah. But this is the Eastman's home. I'm thinking you'll welcome, or do you want me just to carry it on?
You can carry on.
You want me? Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, no.
This is your home too.
Okay. Wow, it's my home now too, everybody. Well, this is really exciting. All right. Well, just so you know, we do have the Eastmans here. So those streamers, they're not on the camera, but they are here. We're very excited about the Eastmans. Oh, thank goodness. Yay.
Welcome.
Phew. See, there's proof. See, there we go. But it's exciting. This is our 89th house concert. Can I get a woo or something? And the streamers, I expect some emojis from you. Come on, yeah, quickly. But it's just exciting. The very first one was December of 2015, and here we are. We are now in 2025, and we have gotten to that. That's just exciting. But we are also excited to have all of you, whether you're in person, whether you're streaming, whether you're going to watch it after the stream. And we love that we can experience it all this way together. And we're also excited for all the many people who have donated through the years, who have made this possible. And we're also excited about the funding that we get. We get funding, continuous funding for many years. We're in our 10th year. We've gotten continuous funding from the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, from the Utah Division of Arts and Museums, from Utah Humanities, from Creative West, which used to be known as WestAF, but now that they have a new name. And we also have gotten continuous funding from the Salt Lake City Arts Council, even though we're not in Salt Lake City right now, but we do things in Salt Lake City. And we just are thrilled about the individuals who make it possible. And gosh, we need more stories. We need more people telling stories, and perhaps after tonight, you'll suddenly want to tell your own. I'm sure you will. Now, we have a special guest. We have Debora Escalante, and she has this theme, Virginia Hall, American Spy. Now, she'll go into it, and there's much more than that. Some of you may already be familiar with this person, but I'm going to have Debora be the one to do that. And she has done storytelling for a long time. She has been everywhere with her stories, and now we get to have her here, whether in person or streaming. Let us bring to the stage Debora Escalante!
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Has anyone heard, before you saw the flyer, has anyone heard of Virginia Hall before? Okay, I see one tentative hand right there. As a matter of fact, Virginia's story, it has just recently come to light, and through most of her life, most of what she was doing was people were not aware of it at all. But let's go back to April 1906, and on April 6th, Barbara Hall was in labor. And she and her husband Ned were excited for their second child. Now, of course, because it was in 1906, they had really no idea if they were having a boy or a girl. But 4-year-old Ned was looking forward to a little baby sister, if possible. And when she was born, they were thrilled. Her father was excited about having a young daughter who he could spend time with. Her mother excited about having a daughter who would grow up and marry someone with money and raise the family's name in society. She had sort of done that too. See, Ned Hall came from a family who were fairly wealthy. He was a banker, and she was his secretary. And so she married the boss and married into money. But she wanted to go up a step farther. I mean, they had a gentleman's farm in the country, and they had an apartment in the city, but they rented it. And that was kind of important to her. Well, Virginia was wonderful, and the family called her Dindy for short, or for her nickname. But she didn't grow up to be exactly what her mother had in mind. She loved hunting with her father. She loved fishing. She loved anything that had to do with hunting. She could skin a rabbit faster than anybody in the area. And she wasn't really interested in the girl kinds of things. She was a bright student. She, in high school, was voted one of the most likely to be really successful. She was class president, she was yearbook editor, but kind of something to give a hint of what might be coming in the future. She wrote in her yearbook, "I need to be free." And so she graduated from high school, and then of course her responsibility was to get married. And at the age of 19, she accepted a proposal from a wealthy young man. And very soon after that, much to her mother's chagrin and to her fiance's astonishment, when she found out that he really didn't love her and he really wasn't being faithful, she dumped him. And she told her father she wanted to go away to school. So she went from Maryland up to Boston, to Radcliffe, and didn't like it a whole lot. So the next year, she went to Barton by Columbia, New York. Liked that a little better. Liked the arts, liked the New York scene, enjoyed that. But this was the 1920s, and most of the fine young people were going abroad for schooling. And so she decided she wanted to go to Paris. And she fell in love with Paris. She actually fell in love as well. But when she told her parents that she was engaged to a Polish military officer, they said absolutely not. And even though she was a little rebellious, apparently she was willing to obey her parents' request as far as that was concerned. And she broke off with him and was devastated by that. But she loved the intellect, she loved the arts, she loved the languages. As a matter of fact, she decided to study language more, so she went to Austria to study at a school specifically for languages, and studied French and German and Spanish and Russian. She graduated from there finally and went back home and decided to go to graduate school. She then enrolled in George Washington University, where she studied French and economics. But that was in 1929. And when the crash hit shortly after, things changed. For a number of reasons. One, money got a lot tighter. But two, in 1931, probably due to much of the stress, her father, coming out of his office one afternoon, collapsed to the ground and died of a massive heart attack. At that point, the family was pretty devastated, and even though John was married and had a young child, in order to save money, they moved in with Barbara, and Virginia went back home. And that was stifling. So she decided that she was going to do what she'd wanted to do. Part of the reason she'd been studying languages was she wanted to be a diplomat or an ambassador or something along those lines. So she applied with the State Department, and she got hired to be a clerk. But she got to be a clerk in Europe, and so she was sent to Warsaw, Poland, which wasn't really her cup of tea, but it was a job, and she kept her eyes open for other possibilities. And after a few months, there was an opening in Smyrna, Turkey. So she applied for that, and she moved to Turkey, where she made friends. She was tall, she was attractive, she had beautiful auburn hair, and she had a personality that really attracted people, and she just had a great set of friends. But one of the wonderful things about Turkey was the great out of doors and hunting. And so it was that one day in early December, she and a group of friends were out snipe hunting. Now, don't think about what you're thinking about girls' camp. Snipes really exist. And they're a very difficult bird to shoot in the air because they have a very erratic flight pattern. But they were out snipe hunting in kind of a marshy area, and she possibly wanted to, make sure she got the first shot. She had her 12-gauge shotgun that had been a gift from her father. She was wearing a long coat. It was December, and as she was hiking through the grass and rushes, she didn't see the wire fence, and she tripped on it. And as she started to fall, her rifle started to fall off her shoulder into her coat. She grabbed it, not remembering she had taken the safety off so that she would be ready to shoot. And as she tipped, she shot herself in the foot, point blank, with the shotgun. It was so painful, and the blood started coming out so much that she actually passed out. Fortunately, her friends were able to form a tourniquet and get her out of there and down to a hospital as quickly as possible. The doctors there took great care of her. They worked to try to get all of the shot out of her foot, and for the next 3 weeks, it started to look like it was healing and was going to heal well. And then things changed, and her foot started to swell, and it started to kind of change color. It obviously was getting infected to the point that the doctors in Smyrna called in an American doctor from a hospital in Istanbul and a couple of nurses, and they came over and did everything they could. But on Christmas Day, they sawed her leg off right below the knee. And then began the process of trying to have that heal. Eventually she was transferred to a hospital in Istanbul, and they were hopeful that it would heal. This was before antibiotics, by the way, which is part of the problem. And then things changed there as well, and she had developed gangrene. They were finally able to get things under control to the point that they could send her back home. Here she was a woman who had such great hopes and desires. And now at the age of 27, a woman who had lost her leg, a woman who people would disregard. But she did go back home, and there in New York, she had a number of kind of reconstruction type surgeries and was fitted for a prosthetic leg, a wooden leg with an aluminum foot. And it had kind of straps that came up the thigh and went around her waist, kind of like a corset to hold it in place. But it chafed, and it weighed 8 pounds and was awkward. But she spent the summer relearning to walk, and she spent the time out at the family's country farm, and thought about an experience she had had when she was so ill and was very close to dying in Turkey. There had been a night when she had a vision. Her father came to her, or maybe it was a dream or a vision, but her father said to her, "You have to survive. Don't give up. You must survive." And that had carried her through the pain of every phase of this part of her life. And finally, after the summer, she felt like she was not going to let that leg constrain her anymore. She learned how to walk. She learned how to take long strides so that it would kind of mask the swinging of the wooden leg. And she applied again to work for the diplomatic services. This time, she asked a friend of the family to approach President Roosevelt, because when she went to apply to work for the diplomatic services, they told her that there were rules against people with disabilities. And so this friend went to talk to President Roosevelt, who you might recall was confined to a wheelchair. But he called in his Secretary of State, who looked at everything that had to do with Virginia and said, no, she has a disability. She will not be able to be hired for a diplomatic position. So again, she was hired by the State Department, but as a clerk. And who knows why exactly, but she was sent to Venice. Canals, 177 arched bridges, cobblestone streets. She got a room in an old historic building where she had to climb flights of stairs. Everywhere that she went was painful, but ever willing to find an answer, this woman bought a gondola, and she hired someone to teach her how to navigate the gondola, and she used that as she traveled all around Venice. Here she was, a woman in her late 20s, a woman who had been pushed out, if you will, a woman who most might consider a woman of no consequence or of no importance. But the people she worked for were very impressed with her. And yet it wasn't very long until she was transferred again, this time to Estonia. And there again, she impressed the people she was working for. She was right above Poland and was very aware in all of her time in Europe with the growth of fascism across Italy, Spain, and Germany, as well as communism in Russia. And she watched as things progressed until Germany attacked Poland. And then she knew that it was time for her to make a move. She resigned from the State Department and traveled back to London. She was hoping she could join the military because she knew that England would be brought into the war, and she felt like she could join the Women's Auxiliary. And they responded to her with the fact that they would not take foreigners. So once again, they tried to stop her, but she was not to be stopped. As she was watching the things that were happening, there was the Battle of Dunkirk. And then she watched the huge migration, over 10 million people who were refugees from northern France, Belgium area, who were traveling south. And she knew that this could possibly be an opportunity for her. So she sailed back to Paris, and she joined the 9th French Auxiliary. They were hiring female ambulance drivers. So after a short course in first aid, she started driving the ambulance. Bombs dropping around her, people hiding in the ditches and being bombed, cars off to the side of the road, military vehicles going back and forth past her. But she stayed with that and worked with the ambulance service as long as it was effective, which was not very long, a few months. And then as the Germans were coming more into France, she felt like it was time for her to get out and figure out what the next part of her plan was. And so she headed down to the border with Portugal, went over into Portugal, and was in a train station going to take a train to the coast before sailing back up to London. There was a gentleman there at the train station who saw this striking, tall, confident woman coming from across the border, getting ready to go on a train, and he thought maybe he should talk to her. He introduced himself, George Bellows, and gave her the impression that he was a salesman of some sort, and they started talking over coffee, and he asked where she'd been, what she'd been doing, and she talked about her work with the ambulance. And as she talked about the bombings and the deaths and the people and the transport, very calmly and confidently, he thought, she might be just what we're looking for. You see, he was actually with the newly formed SOE, which was the Security Office, Executive Office, the equivalent to the OSS or the CIA or things like that. But it was brand new, and they had been trying to get agents into France and had not been successful. As a matter of fact, the few who had gone in had not lived more than a few days. And so as she was about to leave, he said, well, if you're looking for something to do in London, not telling her what, here's the number for a friend of mine, and he might be able to offer you something. So she tucked that in her pocket and went back to London. When she got there, she again went to the State Department and asked if there was anything that she could do, and they offered her another desk job, a dead-end desk job for a woman of no importance. And after a couple of months of that, she was tired of it and decided that she would just kind of change her plans and go home. She hadn't been home for a few years. Her mother was asking her to come home. And so, as a former employee of the State Department, she asked for them to send her back. But they went back to her resignation in Estonia, and it had been over a year. And they said, we have no more duty to send you back to the States. So she decided she would have to get a ticket on her own, and she went to try to find a ticket to get back across the ocean. And because of the war, there was nothing available. And so finally, It again being around Christmas time. She remembered that paper that the gentleman had given her, and she looked at it. Nicholas Petting. And she called him. Now, he was the head of F section for the SOE. And he and his wife Elizabeth invited her over for dinner in early January, and she went over and they had a great conversation. He didn't tell her what he did or why they were talking, but in a short time he did introduce her to the idea. They were looking for someone to be a liaison officer in southern France. Northern France was now captive, but southern France, from Vichy south, supposedly was the free zone and was governed by a man by the name of Pétain, who had been a World War I hero, but was now in his mid-80s and was a little past his prime. But after she went through a brief training, they were just learning about what spies or agents or liaisons would need and what they would need to do. And so they taught her a little bit of this and a little of that, and they gave her some pills. They gave her this little round ball pill that if you put it in your mouth, it wouldn't dissolve. And so you could hold it in your mouth as long as you wanted to. You could even swallow it and it would go all the way through your system. But if you bit it, you would be dead in 45 seconds. Or if you crushed it and gave it to someone else in a beverage or whatever, they would be dead in 45 seconds. There was also a medicine that would make it look like you had typhoid. There was a morphine pill that you could offer to someone if you needed them to sleep for about 4 hours. And so with her arsenal, she went across the channel and into into France. She went initially to Vichy, but after a couple of weeks there, she felt like, number one, Pétain was not quite as bad as the Germans and the Gestapo, but the police there, everything was very, very tense. And so she moved on to Lyon. And in Lyon, she started to try to make some contacts. Well, about that same time, some other agents were coming into the country, and some of them were wireless operators. Another might be a liaison. Another might be an agent who was to do something like sabotage. And so, after she had been there for just a short time, a few weeks to a month, there was a wireless operator who came to the country. His code name was Christophe, and Christophe was captured and then either escaped or was allowed to go. It wasn't ever really clear. But he was up near Marseille, and apparently he had gotten free, and he sent a message out to the dozen or so agents who were in southern France. And he asked them to come to a place called Ville de Marceau on a particular evening. And so a number of the agents went that way. Georges Béguet, who was a wireless operator, and Jean and his wife Gladys, Pierre de Jaloux, went as well. They were French. And a number of others. Some of them forgetting to follow protocol. As a matter of fact, the first man who approached the villa didn't worry about the fact that a neighbor had warned him about suspicious goings-on up there, and walked right up to the door, knocked on the door, and it was opened by the French police, who immediately took him into custody. And one after another, everyone who went to the villa that night was arrested. The last was Georges Béguet. He at least followed protocol. Before he got to the villa, he called the number that he'd been given, and a voice that sounded exactly like Christophe told him, "Everything is fine, come on in." And he did, and was the last to be arrested. It was a huge disaster for the British. They had been working for 15 months to try to get a presence in southern France. And now, in one night, Virginia and one other wireless operator were the only two left. That other wireless operator, Andre Bloch, was hired a couple of days later, and after being beaten, tortured, interrogated, was killed. And Virginia was there alone, without a wireless operator, without a way to communicate to England, And so, being a woman with some initiative, she had started going to visit the American embassy, and she had made friends with someone by the name of Pettingill, who was kind of on the same page she was, and was willing to help with some things, and was willing to let her send messages in the diplomatic pouch that would then go to Switzerland and then up to London. And then London could follow the same path back. It wasn't fast, it wasn't efficient, but it was the first communication that that was being developed. But she really needed to start to develop a network or a circuit of people that could help her. And she had made a couple of contacts, but it was one day when she was visiting Pettingill that he introduced her to a man by the name of William Simpson. William Simpson had been a bomber in 1940 in the Battle of Dunkirk, but he had been shot down over Belgium and had been burned very seriously. His face was scarred, part of his nose was missing, an eyelid was missing. All of his fingers had been burned off. He had lost all of them, and his knee and his foot. And so, besides the horror that people showed on their faces when they saw him, he felt he couldn't do anything on his own. He couldn't even dress himself because of the no fingers. But there was a woman who had made him, in his words, feel like a man again. Her name was Germaine. And when he met Virginia, codename Marie, by the way, when he met Marie, they had something in common, both having disabilities. And they became friends very quickly. And he told her that he would like to introduce her to Germaine Bohry, who happened to be co-owner of one of the finest brothels in Lyon, but also a huge patriot. And she and her ladies were very good at getting little bits of information and then being willing to pass it on to the resistance. As a matter of fact, there was a doctor who she was also introduced to, Dr. Jean Rousset, who came weekly to treat the ladies. And besides being a gynecologist, he was also a dermatologist, and provided medication for them so that they could help the gentlemen who came visit them have a good night's sleep. And then they could go through their pockets and take pictures of the information that they found there. And in addition to that, Germaine had a number of safe rooms within the building that looked very much like just a normal building on the outside. But inside was opulence and beauty and wealth. And she dressed in fabulous clothes and furs and loved black cats who would follow her around. There was one kitten that would follow her up and down the street if she would go out. And Virginia had always kept her distance. She was kind of a traditional woman in terms of morals, and she didn't imagine herself ever speaking to a woman in a brothel, and yet she and Germaine grew to trust each other and to become very good friends. And Dr. Jean Rousset, who had a round, jovial face, a great personality, a little mustache, he had in his clinic had safe rooms and had actually developed or established a sanitarium for lunatics. Germans would have nothing to do with the mentally ill. So that was a very safe place for escaping agents or soldiers to hide. And that became the place that Virginia Marie, set up her office. But she still didn't have anyone who could help with the wireless. She was approached one day by Gabby Bloch. Now, you recall, Gabby was with the group at the villa. She was arrested, but she was released a few days later. And she was trying to figure out a way to help her husband and the other men get released. And she heard about Marie Monon. And so she came to Lyon, and through asking around, was able to meet Marie. And they decided to try to do something about getting these 12 men out of Perpignan. She told her about the prison. It was an ancient fortress. It was damp and cold, and the men had been in there all winter. They had been in there for months by now, 4 months already. There were lice. The food that they got was a little bowl of greasy water once a day and 8 ounces of bread. The men were growing weaker. There was no place they could bathe. There was no fresh water. There were vermin that would gnaw on their feet when they were asleep. And they were losing their strength as well as their hope. And so Marie and Gabby started to develop a plan. Now Gabby was allowed to go in and take things to her husband, and so she was able to tell them that they were going to try to work on something. In the meantime, they knew that that prison was impenetrable and that there was no way they could break them out. They felt like they needed to get them transferred somewhere else. So Virginia went back to the American embassy, and there she met with a General Leahy, who was in charge of things and who had no interest in spies and this kind of underhanded military kinds of things. But she tried to convince him of the importance of the humanitarian needs and the need for freeing or at least moving these men to somewhere better. And so he made a diplomatic effort. And Virginia was thrilled, as was Gabby, to find that they were going to be transferred to another prison, not quite as horrible. This one was called Mosa. And so Marie started putting together a plan, a way to try to intercept them as they were being transferred. But she learned that they would be completely in chains, that the guards had been told to shoot them at the first possibility of anyone trying to make a break for it. And now, after 6 months in the prison, they were so weak that making a run for it wasn't possible. And so they knew that the men would have to get to Mosak before they could do anything. Mosak was kind of like a prison camp. It had huts, it had a double barbed wire fence around it, but the men could go outside. And there was actually a little more food. And Gabby was able to take food in for them and started making the 70-mile trip 3 times a week on trains, and when she could, a vehicle. And she took them food and books, and she could also do laundry for them. And so it was that now all of it was inspected when she brought it, but in a little jar of jam was an even smaller file. Buried in the laundry, wire cutters. In a couple of books that were hollowed out, a fairly small hammer and a screwdriver. And delicious sardines, packed in high-quality metal that could be reused and repurposed as a key. And so they started communicating with each other and started working out a plan. Now the men, as soon as they got there and got a little bit more strength, decided to start a choir. And so they would sing pretty much every day. They also got out in the sunshine to get a little bit of fresh air, and they played a ball game where they would throw the ball and then have to go get it, and so strategically could scout out different parts of the camp to figure out the areas where footprints wouldn't show because the earth was packed down so hard, and where the best escape route might be, and where all of the guard towers were. They were also able to recruit a couple of friendly people who worked there at the camp, and one of them, Jose Gonzalez, in France, kind of a Spanish name, agreed that he would be willing to help them if he could go to London with them and get out of the country. And so the plan was being developed, and on the outside, Virginia was supplying all of the things that Gabby needed to take in and working on things like the escape routes outside and safe houses and that kind of thing. And so it came to be the time when they were going to escape. They had to go during the new moon, so they only had a 4-day window. They decided before that they had to have better communication. They had had another guest, who I forgot to mention to you. One day, a priest in his 70s came into the camp in a wheelchair. He had been a soldier in the First World War and had lost his legs in battle. But he came in, he visited with them, gave them some hope, brought them some paint cans, told them that they could maybe spiff up the inside of their hut. He came a second time, a third time. By that time, they had had time to decorate the hut. And so when he came in, he told them that he'd like to go inside and see what they had done. And so they were able to lift the wheelchair and get him up over the step and inside the hut. As soon as they were in there, he called them all to come right around him and asked someone to be a sentry at the window and someone at the door. And then he said, "I've brought you something." He said, "Lift up my robes." And so they did, to find a radio, a wireless transmitter. Put the robes back down, said, by the way, they were called pianos because you tapped Morse code on them. He said, "This is a lovely piano. It's been tuned very nicely. Use it well and forget where it came from. And keep it hidden." And then he left, never to visit them again. And so for the last week or two before the escape, they were able to communicate wirelessly and more instantaneously. Now, one of the problems with wireless communications throughout France at this time was that the Germans had caught on to the fact that wireless transmissions were happening. And so they had developed vehicles that could detect the wireless signals. And they kept improving their technology to the point that they could triangulate and get within a couple hundred yards of a wireless radio. So it was very dangerous to be on a wireless radio anytime, because even a 3-second transmission might get picked up. And some of the transmitters were transmitting for hours at a time to try to keep up with all of the intelligence that was coming in and going back and forth. And so within a couple of days, there were vehicles driving around the perimeter, the outside of the prison, trying to figure out where a signal was coming from. Of course, it couldn't be from inside the prison, so they never came in to look. And so Georges Béguet was able to send to London the information that they needed to have things set up for the night of the escape. Now that night, Gonzales took 2 liters of wine to his chief to help him relax and have a good night's rest. There was one other guard whose job was to go up to the top of Tower 7, Watchtower 7, and light a cigarette. That would be the signal that they could leave. And so they watched, and they waited, and they watched, and they waited until after 1 o'clock in the morning. And finally Gonzales thought he isn't going to do it, and so quietly left his chief, raced over to the tower, climbed up, with shaking hands, lit his pipe. And the men, if they could have cheered, they would have. That was the signal. And so the first man went out the door. They had painted a dummy door on a piece of fabric so they could have the door open to go, but drop the fabric so that if someone came by, they wouldn't see. He had 1 minute to go out, run to the barbed wire. They had made 2 tables out of planks and set those up to separate the wires on the barbed wire, had a piece of carpet that they threw over it so that they wouldn't get torn up as they were crawling across the wire, and then through and onto the other side. The first man took a string with him and then gave the signal. 3 pulls, it's okay to come. 1, stop. Over the next 11 minutes, man number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. 12 men escaped in 12 minutes, 1 minute for each. As soon as they got past the gate, they ran about a half mile to where a truck was waiting for them. They climbed into the back of the truck. It took off and drove about 20 miles. Then the driver of the truck had them get out and go hide in the bushes and the grass and told them to lay still while he ditched the truck. He took the truck, got rid of it, and then came back and led these 12 men through the woods, deeper and deeper into the woods, until they got to an abandoned home. It had been abandoned for quite a while. It was way away from the roads. he let the men in, and it was stocked with food and crackers and biscuits and some things to drink, and even, and this was a Marie Virginia touch, soap, razors, all the things that they would need. And so their orders were that they were to lay low there for the next 2 weeks. Meanwhile, first thing in the morning, the cry went out that the prisoners had escaped, and a massive manhunt went throughout the country, through all of southern France. For the 2 weeks, they were searching everywhere and killing anyone who got in their way. It was a devastating time for people who knew or helped or knew nothing about it. The guards at the prison camp, many of them were beaten, some of them were killed. But then things started to calm down. And so after 2 weeks, they started to leave to go to Lyon, to Marie, who was going to help them get out of the country. And they went in 2s and 3s, and some of them took significantly longer to get there than the others did. But finally, by April 11th, they were able to wire London saying all of Cameron, the code name for this group, had arrived. And so Marie helped them get to the border of the Pyrenees Mountains, where they would hike across the trail and down into Spain. Some of them were arrested on the other side of the mountain and then released, and so they didn't all get to London at the same time. But within a few months, they had all gotten to London. Much wiser, much more savvy than they had been before. And many of them became leaders in the SOE after that time, especially Georges Béguet, who became the director of all the wireless operators. Shortly after this, someone came to the doctor's office and asked for not the doctor, but for Pepin. Pepin was his code name that Marie had given him. And so Dr. Rousset came out to meet with him. The man was wearing priest's robes, and he introduced himself as Abbé Robert Alèche. And he said that he had been working with the circuit up in Paris, and he had some important microfilms for them. And he needed to see Marie. He knew all the passwords, he knew the names. He was a Catholic priest. Dr. Jeannot was a Catholic, and of course you could trust a Catholic priest. But he told him that Virginia was not available that day. He had asked for 250,000 francs because money needed to be paid to some of the circuit people up in Paris. And so Dr. Jeannot told him to come back in a week. And so he left. But he didn't come back in a week. He didn't come back for 3 weeks. But when he did, he had more information and, again, knew the passwords. And so Marie came to meet with him. The first thing she noticed as she looked at this tall, strong man with piercing blue eyes was the moment he opened his mouth, the German accent. She thought, no, please don't tell me that there is a German in the middle of this circuit. But he reassured her that he lived near an area in France that had been close enough to Germany that he, knew German as a kid and he had the accent, and convinced her that he was right, that he was all right, and gave her information that was important, and so she gave him the money. He left. To make a long story short, he was working for the Germans. And all sorts of things started to go wrong at that point. And it came to the point that Marie knew she needed to escape. Because, you see, after the outbreak from Mossad, she became Hitler's most wanted. As a matter of fact, there were posters plastered all over the place. At first, they had thought, who was this? Who was this man? And then eventually, after Robert Alèche met her, they learned that she was a lady. She became known as the Limping Lady of Lyon. And because of him, they were able to draw kind of a lifelike sketch of her. And it said, Germany's greatest enemy must be found at any cost. And they were plastered all over the place. Virginia knew she had to leave. She tried to tie up all the loose ends that she could, but as the Germans were coming closer and closer to Lyon, she knew that her time was running out. And so one morning, she got up, packed with a very heavy suitcase, and walked the 2 miles to the station, got on the train, and headed south to Perpignan, which was the closest city to the border with Spain. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't want anyone to be able to be interrogated and have to give up that information. So absolutely no one knew where she had gone. When she got there, she checked into a hotel that she had used before when she had helped others get across the Pyrenees. Many others, not just the 12, but many in the months that she had been there. Almost 13 months, over a year, longer than anyone else had from England had been able to stay in the country. She stayed in the hotel till 2 o'clock in the afternoon when she went out into the town square. There was a man named George who would go out to the town square every afternoon between 2 and 3 in case there was someone who needed to talk to him. He saw her hiding in the trees, and they commiserated, and she told him that she needed to get out of the country and she needed to do it now. He told her that the roads were blocked, trains would be full of German guards, that they couldn't fly her out, that the only thing she could do would be to go across the mountains. But any of the normal trails, the easier ones, would be searched. So he told her to go back in and wait, and he would look for a passeur, someone who could take her across the mountain. And so he did. And that night came and told her that a man would pick her up, but that it would cost her 10 times what it had cost to send others across, and that there were 2 other gentlemen who didn't have enough money to pay their own way, and she could only go if she would pay their way as well. And so that would have been over 60,000 francs. She finally said, I will pay you 55,000 francs, and we're going now. She climbed into the van, and the 2 men were huddled in the back of the van, and they traveled the next 20 miles to get to the base of the mountain. When they got there, there was a shelter, and he told them to rest for a few hours. And then, as the sun was coming up in the morning, they started up the mountain. The first couple of miles, the elevation only went up about 500 feet, and so it wasn't too problematic. She had to make sure no one knew about her artificial leg. There were stories about the passeurs who were very, very rough men who were happy to abandon people on the trail, or who had been known to shoot someone who was slowing them down, or push them over the edge. And so she had to make sure she kept up with the 3 men, and that no one knew about her wooden leg. She carried her suitcase in her right hand to kind of mask the limping. That way she was kind of limping on both sides, if you will. But after the first 2 miles, the mountain started to get steeper, and it was now November, and wind and snow started. And as they were climbing the next few thousand feet, it got worse and worse and colder and colder. Finally, they got to the point where her leg was bleeding down the leg and out the sock because it was chafing her stump so badly. When they got up to about 6,000 feet, they were able to stop in a little shepherd's hut. And it's thought that maybe this is where she sent this message. But they waited there for a few hours. There were some biscuits, some things that they had brought with them so they could get a little bit of nourishment. And she messaged England and said, Cuthbert, the name she had given her artificial leg, her wooden leg, Cuthbert, was being troublesome, but otherwise they were all right. The response that came back across was, if Cuthbert is tiresome, eliminate him. Obviously, he didn't know who Cuthbert was. A few hours later, they started again and finally got up to the summit at 8,000 feet. And when they did, Spain was below them. But they still had 20 miles more down the mountain. And 50 miles round trip. All the way. Their passeur demanded his money. She gave the rest to him, and he left them on their own to go down into Spain. It was midday, and they hiked all that afternoon and all through the night, knowing they needed to get to Spain, to the train station in the morning to get on the first train out to get them to Barcelona. Going down was almost even harder than going up because of her leg. She had to lean forward in a really awkward way, and as she was doing that, she noticed that the rivets in her leg were starting to come out, and the leg itself was kind of starting to fall apart. But she changed the way she moved so that she could try to favor that leg as much as possible. And at 5:45 in the morning, they got down into Spain to the train station. The train would be there in 15 to 20 minutes. They just had to stay out of sight that long. And a guard saw them. He looked at them and decided that they were indigent refugees and called the police. And instead of getting on a train to go to Barcelona to a warm apartment and food and a bath, they were thrown in jail. The two men were separated and sent to another prison, and Virginia was moved to a prison in that area. Part of her wanted to give up by that time. But in Virginia, she didn't do that. Instead, she started making friends and found out that one of the prostitutes in the jail was going to be released in 2 weeks, and so befriended her. And when the woman was about to be released, Virginia asked if she could please smuggle a note out and take it to the American consulate. The woman agreed, and so Virginia sent a coded message that was delivered. And as soon as it was decoded, things were put in action to get her out of the prison, which happened just a day before she was about to be transferred to another prison. So she was able to now have a warm bath, sleep in clean sheets, and get ready to go back to London. A celebrated hero as far as London was concerned. She had been in the field longer than any other agent. She had set up the strongest circuit. She had helped the most people escape. She had orchestrated the escape from the Mozac prison. She was so highly esteemed that they nominated her for a major award in England, and it went all the way up to the top. But they said they wouldn't give it to an American. But things as they were, it took her 2 months to get back to London. And when she finally did, the new head of the SOE, the F section, William Buckmaster, told her that her cover had been blown and there was no way they would send her back into France. But that's all she wanted to do was get back into France. And she said, I'll go as a wireless operator, I'll go whatever way you want me to go, but they said absolutely not. Well, she decided she was going to become a wireless operator, whether they would support her and pay for it or not, and so she signed up for a wireless school there. And it was out at a park on the Thames, and she went there and practiced becoming a wireless operator and sending Morse code. 125 words a minute was 25 words a minute was what they needed them to be doing. But unlike any of the other students, well, she was unlike any of the other students. They were all young novices, had no battle experience. And the teachers kind of didn't know what to do with this woman who knew so much about France. But on the weekends, she asked to leave and go back into London. No one else did that, but I couldn't really stop her. And so she did. And she graduated from her class. And about that same time, there was a new organization that had been started by the Americans after they had joined the war. It was called the OSS. It's the equivalent of Britain's SOE. And someone from the OSS called someone from the SOE and asked about Virginia Hall and how reliable she might be. And the response was, we consider her very reliable. But of course wouldn't tell him anything else. And so it was that she was talking to the OSS. Now shortly after that, the first 2 agents or spies or liaisons or whatever from the OSS were to go into France. Not into southern France, but into central France at this point. So there was a German motorboat that, in the dark, went across the channel and up to the shore of France. And there were 2 people in it besides the driver, the captain. And one of them was an old peasant woman. She had gray hair pulled back in a clip, and shawls and blouse and skirts. And she climbed out of the boat. She was probably in her late 60s and made her way onto the beach. The other was a man in his early 60s who stepped out of the boat, complained that he twisted his knee, even though he wasn't supposed to make a sound, and set out onto the shore. The woman in disguise was 38-year-old Virginia Hall, now known as Diane. In order to have her new cover, since her poster was still all over France, was to be an old peasant woman. And so the skirts and the peplum did things like hide her gun and the other things that she had. She had even gone to Hollywood makeup artists who were there in London who taught her how to age her face and put really lifelike wrinkles on her face. And to a rather feared dentist who filed her teeth down to make them look old and worn. She was one of many who decided to change their appearance so that they could continue to serve. But she did not succumb to surgery, that many of them did. The man was Henry Lassault, who was a painter and a grumbler, and the OSS felt like that was probably enough of a cover for him. Virginia's main task was to get rid of him. All the way so far in her work, she had found that the men who were in charge, because women could never be in charge, the men who were in charge just tried to get in her way. They bragged about having thousands of people ready to go and having built up huge armies when maybe they had 3 or 4 contacts. And so she did everything she could to get away from them as soon as possible. She and Henry Lassault went to the home of Madame Long. And Madame Long, of course, she had known her from before and invited Diane in and found another place for Henry Lassault as soon as possible because she did not want him to come back. But Diane needed to get to where she could be of use. And so she set out for an area called Aulsmay. And there she began looking for the Marquis or Maquisards, who were the independent French underground. Now was not the time to develop people who could watch and report, but the ones who could actually sabotage and go to battle. And when she was there, she again made connections, and within a very short time, within a month or so, she had she had found an ex-military man who had 100 men at his command. She divided them into 4 groups and trained them so that they could do sabotage. She also set things up. She was the radio operator as well, so she was doing the full-time job of recruiting and training as well as the full-time job of wireless operating. And she led their sabotage as well as plane drops to drop in ammunition and food and all of the medicines and the kinds of things that people needed. Within a very short time, over 25 drops were scheduled by her. But every time she would train and get the people ready to go, one of the men would be ordered to actually take command of them. Something that annoyed her quite a bit. But then a change in orders came. She was to go to another community, the area called Le Chambon, which was high on a plateau, about as high as you could get in that area of France. And so she traveled up to Le Chambon, and she climbed tediously up the hill to a school for children. And she asked for Monsieur Bonny, who was one of the teachers there, and started to talk to him using her cover, which most of the time she was there, her cover, originally she was as an American journalist, and she sent articles to the New York Times, who sometimes published them and sometimes sent them straight to London because they were always coded, but who now said that she was a journalist, and she wanted to learn about their efforts to save children, which they did at this school. But after about an hour of talking, she dropped that and told them that she was Diane, and that she was there to try to find out about the Marquis, and could he introduce her to anyone. He told her he was a pacifist, he could not help her in any way, and that she needed to leave. And so, feeling like her trip to Le Chambon was a waste, she left and went back down to the hotel. But Monsieur Bonny had second thoughts after she left, and so he mentioned to a tutor about this woman. He was part of a marquis. He was a marquisard. And so when he heard about her, he went to his chief. His name was Legrand. The chief's name was Fayol. He got to Fayol's at night and told him all about this woman. Fayol wasn't sure, and he certainly wasn't sure about a woman, but they sneaked out of his home and went, even though it was past curfew, went to the hotel where Diane was and went up and knocked on her door at about 3 o'clock in the morning. He didn't know what to expect, but he was surprised when the door was opened by a tall, regal, commanding woman. After cursory introductions, she invited them in, had them sit down, and began asking them questions. What is your office? Who do you take orders from? Do you have landing fields? How many men can you call immediately? Will you obey my orders completely? Fayol agreed and gave her answers. They had a reconnaissance group. There were some landing areas. He did have a number of men and could get more if they had equipment and tools. And so she said, be back here. It was now 4 o'clock in the morning. Be back here with the car by 8 a.m. And so they left. There was a lot to do. It's hard to get a car. You have to have a permit, all sorts of things. But at 8 a.m., he drove up, not only in a car, but in a Citroën, which was the kind of car that the Gestapo used when they would come through towns. This one was even better than the usual ones. It was outfitted with a faster engine and a windscreen that could fold down so that you could shoot out the front. And most importantly, any Nazis would let them pass. And so he took them up to a plateau, and they found a landing spot that was going to be wonderful. She told him that she needed to go back down to Kozny and wrap a few things up, and so she left, saying she would be back in a week. But a week came and went, and she wasn't back. She was doing a lot. And a second week went by, and she wasn't back. Fayol was growing impatient, and so he recruited 2 people, Jacqueline and Eric, a teacher and a bookseller, to go down to Kozny and find her. Miraculously, Jacqueline ran into her because Diane Virginia was always on the move, making sure she wasn't anywhere that someone could track her down. But she did find her, and she said she had sent a message. It must have been intercepted or lost somewhere, and she was ready to go. She had her 3 suitcases and was ready to leave. No longer dressed as the peasant, but they went to the train station, knowing that they needed to be careful and not be in sight for very long. They had hardly gotten there when a gentleman approached them and told them that German officers were coming to check the train, and they needed to hide, and they needed to follow him immediately. They started to follow him, not knowing if it was a booby trap, not knowing if they really could trust him. Virginia was she had a great ability to kind of judge character, and so they followed him, and they went into kind of a little closet and hid in there as the German boots marched past out on the train station platform. And then at the very last moment, they jumped on the train. They hadn't gone more than a few hours of their 300-mile journey when the train screeched to a stop as the sound of airplanes, bombers, came over them. Everyone was panicked. The doors opened on the trains. People started jumping off. And just as Eric and Jacqueline were to jump off, noticing that Diane looked very calm and serene, she took them by their arms and said, "They're British planes. I've told them I'm on this train. They won't bomb the train." And so after the bombs had been dropped in the area, people came back on the train. They set off again, but Eric asked her, "But what about the bridge up ahead? Won't they bomb that?" She said, "Yes, but not until we pass." And so they made it safely to Saint-Antillon, which was at the base of the plateau. There they got out to go meet the car that was to take them up to Les Chambons. It didn't show up. It didn't show up. It didn't show up. Finally, Eric took off to go to the home of the driver. He got partway there when a man he had never seen before walked up to him and asked him for a light for his cigarette. Eric pulled out a match and started to light the cigarette when the man leaned in and said, The driver has been denounced. His house is under surveillance. Do not go there. And then he left, disappeared down the alley. Eric had no idea who he was, how he knew who he was, but he ran back and had to figure out another way to get them out. A couple of years earlier, he'd worked in a factory in the village, and so he went to his old boss and asked him if he could help them. And he said he would. Took a car, picked them up, took them to his place where they could wait, and then check into a hotel. They checked into the hotel that night, but then there were guards coming around, and they knew they couldn't get on the train, and they didn't know how they were going to get up the mountain. Well, interestingly enough, in the middle of the night, there was some sort of medical emergency in the hotel, and an ambulance pulled up, and some first responders came in with all of the medical kinds of things they needed, and a few minutes later, they came out carrying a body on a stretcher, fully wrapped in blankets, and took it down and put it into the ambulance, and started slowly for the hospital. And as they passed the turnoff to Les Chambons, it veered to the right and blasted up the hill. Virginia was able to take the blankets off, and she and her 3 suitcases made it to the top of the hill. When she got there, there was a priest there to meet her, but he didn't know anything about where she was to go or what she was to do. Faol had not set up a house for her, and so she had the priest take her to Faol's house, and she moved in with him, which was not exciting for Faol at all. But she had to have a place where she could send her messages. So after a couple of days, they found a farmer and a barn. And over the next few weeks, month or so, she moved probably 3 or 4 times to stay ahead of those who were searching for her. But they pulled together a great group of maquisards. They were led by a man whose name was Bob. And they were mostly young, and many were orphans. Many had lost family, and they were untrained, but she began training them and preparing them for when the first drop would happen. And finally, the night for the first drop was coming. Faol, in the meantime, had been trying to stop things, anything that he could. He did not want to support her in any way. And so he didn't go up to the drop with the crew that she had taken up there. Once they got up there, they set out bundles of sticks in a large Y shape, each bundle of sticks 150 paces from the others. She set up sentinels around the edge in case anyone tried to come up, and they started watching for the plane. An hour passed. Another hour. Another hour. Faol showed up just to see if she would come through with anything. Another hour. One of the young men, an orphan by the name of Gabriel, was charged with listening for the planes. And finally, at about 3 in the morning, he gave the signal that he heard a plane coming in. Immediately, the men lit the sticks to be the fire to guide the plane that would come in the wide part of the Y and then drop from 600 feet, the parachutes. And 3 planes came in, dropping over 3 tons, 12 huge containers of weapons, uniforms, boots, munitions, explosives, food, medicine, a couple of niceties like a little candy and crackers and things like that. Dropped all of them in a matter of moments, and then took off back toward England. And then Virginia gave the signal, Diane to them, gave the signal for them to start the cleanup. They had to leave without a trace within 15 minutes. They put out the fires, picked them up, cut the parachutes, opened the canisters, moved everything out of the big containers into wagons that were drawn by oxen, took the containers to the edge of the plateau where they threw them over into a rushing waterfall, picked up any strings, threads, parachutes, and took everything back down the mountain, leaving no trace within 15 minutes. After that, there were night after night, over 20 drops, and her men used those to go against the Germans who had been coming back north. You see, when there was the invasion off of North Africa, much of the army went to southern France. But now that D-Day had arrived, they were all heading back north. And so the job of the maquisards and the guerrilla army was to stop them So they blew up bridges. They put wedges in railroad tracks to throw trains off the track. They would put a little hole in the gas tank of a Jeep and then light the gasoline. They became very, very good saboteurs until finally the Germans had been pushed out of that area. Things were winding down, and as things finally calmed down, Virginia had been requesting a couple of officers to come and help train the men for weeks and weeks and weeks. And finally, after everything was calmed down, 2 men parachuted in. Henry Riley and Paul Goyot. But the night she was waiting for them to come, they didn't come, and she finally canceled the order. She didn't realize that because of wind and turbulence, they had parachuted out and had landed 20 miles away. They didn't know that the area had been cleared of Germans, and so they were on the run. They landed in trees, and so after they disentangled themselves, they searched for the 5 packages, containers that they had brought, finding only 3, and then over the next few days traveled until they finally got to where Diane was. They were 2 delightful men. The first one, Henry, was tall, handsome, a Princeton man, a finely trained officer with no battle experience. The other one was short and brash and bigger than life personality and only talked in slang. And both of them respected her and knew that she was who would call the shots. But Paul, the shorter one, you see, she was 5'8", he was about 5'2". She was 38, he was 33. But he made her laugh, and they became good friends. And after things finally calmed down, and they thought they were going to go to battle, and then were called off and told that they could disband because the Allied troops had moved forward enough that the resistance were not needed anymore. But they could leave and join the regular army. And so, one night, they were, as they were waiting, they were by a lake, and Paul and Virginia got into a boat and rowed out into the lake. And for the first time in years, she was able to let down her guard. She was able to feel safe for a minute. She was able to have feelings for someone. And so, Paul and Virginia and Henry and a number of the others got back to England. Paul had been born in France, but it was not the France that there was now, and he wanted to go back to the U.S. So they went back to Baltimore, and eventually they were married, much against Barbara's wishes, because he was not what she had had in mind. The OSS was dissolved after the war. The CIA replaced it. Virginia became the first woman as part of the CIA and finished her career with them, the least favorite part of her career. Much of what she had been done stayed secretive and hidden until after she passed away in 1982. But then there became a renewed interest in her. She was awarded some of the highest awards in both England and in the United States. But she refused to accept them in public. And so she and her mother visited President Truman, who gave her the award in person, but it was not published. At this point, the CIA will tell you that she was one of the greatest heroes of World War II. As a matter of fact, in the CIA museum, there are 5 sections that are designated to people with major contributions. 4 of them are men, 1 is Virginia. Also, the training, the building where new CIA agents go to get trained is now named the Virginia Hall Expeditionary Center. Virginia Hall, a Baltimore schoolgirl, a woman with a disability, a woman of no importance, a woman who made a huge difference. Thank you.
Wow. Isn't that something? I mean, just hearing all those stories about Virginia Hall, and of course, the way that Debora shared that with us tonight. Let's have another round of applause to Debora Escalante. Whoa. And I'm expecting from you streamers, I'm expecting some emojis and comments. Yep, good. Hold on, I'm going to take a Let me take a peek here. Yes, Brava has been there. Plenty of applause. We have like six applauding hands in a row right there. That's beautiful. Come on, keep it coming, people. I know you're there. Don't be shy. This is the time. Come on. All right. Well, while you're working out your most glorious comments here, I'm just going to then say that it has just been a pleasure tonight. We can be inspired by these people, by these stories, and if you ever feel like you are of no importance, I hope that you think about every single person on this earth can make a difference, and I bet there's plenty of people who have stories about you. Maybe not going espionage level, but I bet there are. So I challenge you to do that. Oh, good, we got a few more. Oh, we got some outstanding and amazing. So beautiful, see? The other thing is, I suddenly realized, you need to know that there will be another house concert, the 90th house concert, which will be towards the end of March. So if you go to storycrossroads.org/houseconcerts, in about a day or two, it will be updated and you will be there. So whether you come in person or streaming, you'll know that there's more. There's also, and I'm going to actually put this up on here, so hold on. See if I've unleashed myself from this. Oh boy. Look at this. Oh, look at this. Are you ready, guys, everybody? Look at that. Oh. So what they're seeing right now is the celebrating 10 years. So we are going to be May 5th through 8th. Oh, I see what I need to do, though. It does a double thing there. Oh, don't. There we go. Now it's more lovely. Sorry, everybody. Okay, so May 5th through 8th, 2025 is our 10th Summit and Festival. It is going to be fantastic. We're doing some new things this year where we're encouraging community dialogue. So we have presentations, but then you get to talk after. The presentations themselves will be recorded, so if you can't come in person, you can still enjoy them. The discussions, though, that is the perk of in-person. That won't be recorded because we're having safe space rules for those discussions. It's going to be fantastic. And if you go to storycrossroads.org/festival, you can see the schedule and what is on the brink. And also, I did want to do another shout out to another funder that I suddenly realized, holy cow, I can't believe I didn't mention them and in the first round at the beginning. And that is Zoo Arts and Parks of Salt Lake County, ZAP. And I have to do that, maybe because I just thought, of course I would have said their name, because they are not only a continuous funder for us, but they are our largest funder for us. And so we really appreciate that, and I wanted to give that time of that. And a lot of you here, like, you may have already donated and everything, but there's storycrossroads.org/donate, and that way you can give a thank you to Debora, and also it helps support Story Crossroads. So it helps both the organization and the artist. So I know the people in person, you're anxious, you know there's refreshments, and you want to suddenly get autographs from Debora or something, hug her, something. So I'm going to allow that to happen. So thank you everybody who's joined online. Check us out. There's so much to explore at storycrossroads.org. Until we tell again. Oh, I didn't stop the streaming yet, and I'm going to turn off this picture here. I see that someone in the stream actually was asking about what got Debora interested in that topic. Hey, Debora, really quick for the streamers, and I'm sure the people here too, why did you even delve into Virginia Hall, if you don't mind? Really quick.
I'm in a book group, and it was our book for a couple of months ago, actually last month. And so I just barely heard about her 2 months before that. And there's a great book. It's called A Woman of No Importance. It's an award-winning book. Let me hold it up here. By Sonia Purnell, and I highly recommend it. To do that way. Yeah. It's also on Audible.
All right. Ooh, see, this proves that I do read comments with you streamers, and yay, thank you, and thank you to the Eastmans. Woo!